Hi, and welcome to our third week of class. We are in February already. Just a quick reminder, field experiences. Please upload those forms for me. Please get them signed by your advisor or email me regarding an approval. If I approve, I'll sign it and send it back to you, and then you can upload it. Today we're going to look at essentially the beginning of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, known as Paradigms and Principles. This is somewhat of an example for you to follow as you're thinking about your group project, because you have to do a PowerPoint. You certainly don't need to follow the exact same format. I think you should do what you feel is going to best communicate the information to the entire class so that they can consider it and can consider how the information would help them in their own personal situations, in their own personal lives. And if you can link things back to any of the core concepts of family and consumer sciences, I note that on the grading rubric as a plus. It would be a really good thing to do. It's not necessarily a requirement, but you do have to reflect on those core principles on several occasions in this class, so I thought this would be a good place to start. The 7 Habits then was written by Stephen Covey, who passed away in 2012. Stephen Covey was essentially brought into many different organizations who were undergoing problems, essentially, and he would be able to help them with some of their problems, help them operate better. He was known for doing this 360 review for people in leadership positions so that they would hear back from staff members, all of the different org chart individuals that would report up into them and gain some good insight into why some of the problems were taking place that were taking place. That's just a little bit of it. He was very, very interested in how we as individuals can really look much deeper than just deeper in the sense of looking at ourselves very closely and asking ourselves questions about ourselves would be probably a really good place to do it. Now, for organizations, they would do the same thing, but in terms of we as a group of students, and certainly I have been a student for many years, how we can look at ourselves and ask ourselves questions and provide ourselves with answers that can help us really search for what makes us effective and at the same time search for what could keep us from being more effective. He talks about inside out in the beginning of the book and says that for many individuals there's a degree of outward success. You know, we mark our successes. They're marked for us. We know what they are. We basically know how we've gotten there. But that sometimes there's something more on the inside that we need to search for. And his book really is a reflection, and that's why on several occasions I refer to the things that you're writing as reflection papers, because it's really getting inside and asking yourself questions in terms of your own effectiveness. He says we must look at the lens through which we see the world. That has to do with, what do we see when we look outside the window? What do we see when we're getting on a bus? What do we see when we're walking to school? That lens, in terms of how we see the world, is maybe even more important than actually seeing the world, because it's that purposeful viewing that brings us to a closer attention to what it is that we are viewing. It helps us shape our impressions, and perceptions are so important to us. They help shape our lives in many respects. So how we see the world is essentially what he was referring to. And he also talked about personality and character as different things. He talked about pre-World War I. World War I started in 1914. Before that, he said that people were essentially more character-oriented. And the difference between character and this notion of what follows World War I, where we are interested in personality, are two uniquely different things. Someone's character can be defined as something that speaks to maybe their values, how they perceive the world, where a personality might be something, well, Gus is really fun to be around, or Gus is a funny guy, or something like that, which is really more personality, where a character trait might be Gus is a hard worker, or Gus is interested in student success, or those kinds of things. That's the difference between them. So as you consider for yourself how you define character and personality, think closely about that. Our world has a lot to do with personality these days, because there are so many people in the world that serve in many respects as people we admire. And the question then becomes, what is it that we are admiring? Are we admiring the personality because they're funny? Or are we admiring their personality because they're great parents and they're hard workers, or whatever the story is? So those differences I think, are very, very significant. And in terms of driving success, well, that's a really big and good question. I think we would think of character as being successful. I mean, can you be, a comedian who does comedy movies and just be so funny that your personality might drive success for you? Perhaps. And perhaps not. I mean, I think there is more to it than meets the eye sometimes. So what we see on the outside is not necessarily this whole thing that he's talking about in terms of the inside. He also spoke in his book of primary character and secondary, which is more the social side, greatness. It's very, very similar to what I was just discussing in terms of character versus personality. Personality ethics can lead to impressions, Gus is a really funny guy. However, in the long term, what's so great about that can not maybe reap the best of what Gus possibly has to offer. So he's more interested in character ethics because they are long-lasting. They are what help get us through our lives. They are what add body to our minds, to our inside selves, to all of that. And I think that's an important consideration. He uses the word paradigm, which actually comes from the Greek. And in Greek, paradigm is the word meaning essentially example. So it's a model of something, or a theory of something, or an explanation of something, but it really just evolves from this notion of an example of something. And a paradigm can shift from one thing to another thing. And his whole premise is that you can shift your paradigm to thinking more about character, and by looking at your own character, how can you achieve success in your life? And that's the essential, I think, takeaway of his book. He says we all have realities and values. We assume that the way we see things is how they are or should be. But as you'll see on the next slide, you might each see different things. I mean, the fun thing about the next slide is in a classroom, I can poll the students and see who is seeing what. For an online class, it's just going to be up to you. And I hope you can see these slides or study your book and look at them and determine what it is that you're seeing, because each of them you could see two different things. These are them. With the first one on the left, probably you've seen, but there are two things. If you look at the white space, you can see the shape of a vase or an urn or something that would hold a liquid or a flower or something like that. And if you look at the black part, you see two profiles of individuals who are looking at each other. So you have to let your mind do that little shift to see both of those things. And the same on the other side, on the right-hand side, there is a figure that appears more as a younger woman looking back to her right. So basically looking over her right shoulder where we're seeing her left ear. But if you let your brain shift a little bit, let your eye shift, let your mind shift a little bit, and you will see a different figure that looks like a much older person. And let me just go ahead and use my mouse. This part becomes the older person's nose, her eye, and her chin. On this younger person, the hair, she's looking backwards. This is her eyelash, this is her nose, and this is her chin. So hopefully you're seeing the difference between those two. And the person looking back, this is her neck. The person looking forward, this is her chin. So his point of putting this in the book is just to note that how we see things is crucial to our understanding of things. This I just put in because I think it's fun. If when you try to stop on one of those gray squares that you're seeing right in these little intersections, once you stop there, you can't see that gray anymore, which is a really tricky thing that has to do with how our eye processes information and our brains process information. This paradigm shift that he's looking for might be called an aha moment, when a light goes on. And that shift comes from breakthrough moments when our thoughts might be challenged. And a paradigm shift, he argues, doesn't have to be a positive thing, because he thinks about the paradigm shift away from character into personality, not necessarily as a good thing. There's something to be said for the person who you look at and say that, they've got so much character, versus the person you see on TV that you just think is really funny or what have you. And that was an essentially a societal paradigm shift that has taken place, and arguably for some people maybe it has, and for other people maybe it hasn't. But each person's own paradigms help define who they are and how they see themselves and how they see their relationships with the rest of the world, and etc. And if we sometimes have to step into a more difficult role, we might have to undergo a paradigm shift in order to view things in a different angle. And that's probably a very healthy thing. It's allowing your mind to think about things from many perspectives. A thorough paradigm shift, he argues, is required to make changes, and his book is all about how can I change myself to be more effective. He goes through a lot of different stories about his personal life in the book, and some of them do go on for a little bit. So if you can just sort of get past that and get to the nitty-gritty, I think that you will find the meaning that is behind those stories. Sometimes seeing differently requires being different to experience things, and how can I be different if I haven't asked myself questions about how I am? And this book really is about self-reflection. And then through growth and development, maybe I will start to see things differently and change that paradigm. The principle center, principles are things that guide that guide us, or that can guide us. And these are some of the examples that you see here. Things that we consider, if you look at these things, they really have to do with character. To a great extent, and these are things that we would probably look at and say that these are all positive character traits that people can have. Principles, he argues, are not practices and not values, but guidelines for human conduct. So if I go back to that and say, yeah, being fair is very important, and having integrity is very important to who I am. Being honest, all of these different things that we see here certainly are great guidelines for ourselves. And his book also talks about these things throughout in terms of basically self-rewards, feeling good about yourself, feeling better about yourself, seeing other people in a different light, hearing other people, you know, speak before we even respond to them, and listening empathically, for example, understanding where they're coming from and then responding. All of these things as character traits can be very, very helpful in our lives. Through reading the book, hopefully there will be growth and development for you as individuals, and just looking at your professional goals and asking yourself, how can I make a difference in the world, and how can I make a difference for myself, and how can I make a difference for my family? And one of the things aside from the book that I would offer is that we are, as individuals, we can do so much sometimes, and we do have to take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of other people, and that's a really important thing. So that personal growth and that personal care is definitely something to also consider as you're going through the book. Life is cognitive. That means we build upon things from our past experiences. We learn from what has been done in the past. We learn from history, and we build upon that. So that's all very time consuming also. He argues that the way we see the problem is the problem. So it's how you view something, not necessarily the something. And he gives this example. How do you do that? Teach me how you do that. When people look at someone else and think, my goodness, but they are just so successful, I want to be like that. Show me how you do that. That he says is really the problem. It's that the way that you see it, seeing something deeper, more fundamentally, is really what I need to be asking myself, rather than just say, teach me how to do that. That's what he's saying actually is the problem. If you don't look more deeply into it, into your life, into your own self, and that sort of thing. He says that deeper thinking in search of a new model, theory, example is needed based on principles. Remember, he's principle driven, and principle and character go together. Those things together can yield high efficacy or high effectiveness in our behaviors, and that's what his 7 Habits book is about. Principle-centered and character-based. That's the nature of what he's getting at. Those principles, again, let's look back. Here are examples of character. And he says that character-based, principle-centered, inside-out thinking is the best thing that you can do to be more effective in life. Private victories precede public victories. That means if I can do something with myself first, that I can be more helpful to others after. And it's a process of renewal. So it's basically, it's circular. It keeps going round and around and around. Aristotle said we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act but a habit, and that's where growing things into habits can actually take place. They're powerful. They're consistent. We do them all the time. They're unconscious. Some of us have habits of things that we don't even have to think about. Sometimes not so great, sometimes great. Depends if you're a habitual exerciser or something, that can be good. There are other habits that are not so good in our lives, and each of us knows, what we need to do to make ourselves healthier and feel stronger and all of that. Habits can express our character, produce our effectiveness, or conversely ineffectiveness. But they can. He argues that they can be learned. I can teach myself how to exercise more regularly, or I can teach myself how to be a better listener, or I can teach myself how to not be reactive but be proactive. These are just some of the things he talks about in his book. He says the intersection of knowledge, which is what to do and why, skill, how to do something, and the desire, want to do something, all come together in terms of creating a more effective self. and the habits move us on a continuum. That means it keeps going. It doesn't necessarily have a beginning point and an end point. From depending or dependence to independence. So dependence being the person, independence meaning just I, and then interdependence, which is we, which certainly adds to the whole mix because it's how we interact in our social lives and everything that we do. The first three habits deal with self-mastery, moving a person from dependence to independence, and the private victories, the essence of character growth, that is, preceding public victories. Habits 4, 5, and 6 deal with teamwork, cooperation, communication. These are public victories. And clearly, in the workforce, whatever it is that you're doing, most of what we do not do in an isolated state or by ourselves. We work in teams. We have other people's work that comes into our work, or their emotions can come into our emotions at the workplace. We have to communicate with people, and these then become public victories where we are working on how can I be better at work? How can I be a better team player? How can I be a better listener? How can I seek a better way of doing something? And then one of my favorites really is habit 7, because it's all about taking care of yourself so that you can just keep getting better and better and better and renewing yourself throughout the process. Habit 7, again, sorry for the interruption, deals with renewal and improvement, which means you're constantly looking at yourself and taking care of yourself. And I just think that's so important in our lives. Effectiveness, then, at the end of the day, what does that mean? It means ability to problem solve. It means the ability to recognize opportunities and maximize them. It means to keep learning, keep growing. He talks about a P-PC balance in one of the habits, which is the first P is for production of desired results, and the second PC is the capabilities. So how do you then produce your results? I know what I want to do, but do I have the capability to do that? And sometimes in our lives, I think we struggle with that. So he talks about that definitely as a balance. It's your ability to do what you want to do, but to reasonably do it while taking care of yourself at the same time. Assets that he talks about are physical, financial, and human. Each of these are all crucial as you look at this final semester here at San Francisco State and moving on into a professional world, doing the work that you love. Each of these things comes into the mix. And how does this make a difference for us? Well, it can make a big difference if you stop and really reflect on what the readings are in this class, so that you can ask yourself, how is this going to make a difference in my life? I want to be, I want to open my own preschool, or I want to open my own nursery, or I want to work with kids that need help after school, or I want to work, with community nutrition and help people learn what's best for them. Well, if I can take the things that Covey spoke about and ask myself questions that make me a better self so that I can work more efficiently and be more productive in my professional life, I think that would really be beginning with the end in mind, which is how the book starts. It would help me to see where I want to be now, and then grow into that as I continue on in a professional life. So hopefully it's just an overview of what he's looking at, how he has described his book, how the book is intended to help individuals who read it partake in it, reflect on it, ask themselves questions about themselves, and be able to, live in a professional world where you feel comfortable doing so. You know when you have to say no. You know when you have to say yes. You know what makes a great team. And you just feel great getting up every day going to work. I think all of those things are really important. Now, in terms of the work that you'll be doing for this class, you'll be putting together a presentation in groups, and those groups are defined in week 3 on iLearn. All you have to do is open the file that tells you which presentation group you are in, and then you can find out contact information for all of your fellow students by going into, you should be able to go into users. And I'm not sure from the student perspective how you get to that. For the instructor, I have to go into an editing option, but you guys don't have that. So I would look for the user, if it's a tab or if it's a button. And once you get in there, you'll see an entire list of everyone in the class with their email addresses from San Francisco State. You can look at everyone on the list and, just start emailing each other and figuring out how you want to go about it. You do not need to meet in person. This is an online class, and so we don't require that. You can decide you wish to meet in person. That is your option. But you can do all of it through email, or Google Drive, or whatever it is that works best for you as a group. The groups are large, admittedly, so that is by itself is going to... once you have your file complete, you will upload it, but I only want one person to upload it. But please do make sure that you have every single person's name on the first or second slide, so I can see that very, very easily. That's going to be important, so I know who to give the points to, and etc., and who gets comments on which particular habit. So all of the due dates are different, and then you will be also writing an essay, and there's a separate list for those. So look at the other list and find your name and see which habit you will be writing an essay on. It'll be it's essentially a personal essay, but the questions are there. You can just download the form, type in your information, and then just upload the form right back. And that's what you would need to do for these two things. So one is going to be the presentation on whatever your due date is. They're all different. And one is going to be the essay, and those due dates are different also. So please download and look at those two files. And if you have any questions regarding any of this, please do go ahead and email me, and I'd be happy to respond to you. So I hope this was helpful, and